The Manchester City Academy is basically just a factory of spare parts for Pep Guardiola to pull from so that he can strengthen the dynasty he's created at Manchester City. He'll take a player you've never heard of before and turn them into a world-class talent, hence Phil Foden. And the player we're talking about today is a player that Pep Guardiola has not praised like any other young talent he's had in his entire career. Except for maybe that guy, but we're talking about humans today. Either way, the Manchester City Academy is nothing to be scoffed at. They're the same academy that brought us the man who burst onto the scene, didn't he? Micah Richards.
I burst onto the scene, didn't I?
There's no doubting the class of this academy, but there's some other names too. Cole Palmer, Jadon Sancho, Kieran Trippier, Kasper Schmeichel, but we're not talking about any of them. We're talking about a Norwegian forward at Manchester City who gets on the score sheet for fun. Oscar Bobb. Oscar Bobb is Manchester City's next young stud, and he's already begun to prove himself in the Premier League last year, but this season could really be his breakthrough. Pep Guardiola even says something pretty profound about him.
Oscar got something that is the most important thing.
And that one thing that we're going to talk about in today's video is what makes or breaks a lot of professional players' career. And Pep Guardiola would know. But before we talk about how Pep Guardiola is inevitably going to turn Oscar Bobb into a player worth $100 million, we have to talk about how he got to Manchester in the first place, because it was not a straightforward path. In fact, Oscar Bobb and his family were getting in trouble with FIFA, the organization, yes, FIFA, before he even turned 12 years old. So it's safe to say he didn't get off to a great start when it comes to becoming a professional footballer. Oscar Bobb grew up in Oslo, Norway, and played for his boyhood club Lyn up until 11 years old, but that's when Porto came knocking on the door. And it's no secret that these Portuguese league teams like Benfica, Porto, Sporting have produced so many talented players at the highest level, and their academies are a main source of revenue for them year in and year out. So they wanted to get Oscar Bobb part of their academy, and his family agreed. This academy was going to be much higher level than what he got at Lyn. Oscar Bobb and his mother packed up their entire life that they had in Oslo, Norway, and moved it to Portugal for one reason: to help him develop as a footballer. But once he got to Portugal, he couldn't play a single minute of football. This ended up being the worst possible decision they could have made for his career, because FIFA have a very clearly stated rule under Article 19 of FIFA's regulations on the status and transfer of players that bars clubs from signing foreign players under 18 years old, unless they have one of the three exceptions. The first exception to that rule is the border proximity exception. You can transfer to a club in another country as long as you live near the border and that club is within 100 kilometers of where you live. I don't know if you know much about European geography, but I'll fill you in. Oslo to Porto is just outside of that exception. The second exception to the rule is called the EU exception, where as long as you're 16 to 18 years old and both clubs that you're transferring to and from are part of the European Union, it's allowed. You can transfer to a foreign country's club. And Lyn and Porto are both part of the European Union. That part's not the issue. The issue is that Oscar Bobb was 11 years old. And so unless he wants to pull the reverse version of the benchwarmers I am 12 and get some paperwork saying he was 16 years old, it's just not gonna fly.
He's got documentation.
And even if it did, does Oscar Bobb really want to be blending in with the U17s as an 11-year-old? Who knows, maybe he could have done it. He is just that good. However, the third and final exception is where this story gets crazy, because it's called the parental relocation exception, where if a parent is moving to another country for work reasons completely outside of football endeavors, then their child would be allowed to come with them and join an academy in that country. And this is the exact exception that his mother, Turid Gunn, was trying to use. She was claiming that she was moving to Portugal to join a theater group. She worked as an actor, and it just so happened that the Porto Academy that showed a lot of interest in Oscar Bobb just happened to be right down the road, which obviously raised some eyebrows for FIFA. In 2015, after almost 2 years of this looming transfer, Oscar and his mother Turid finally made the move to Portugal. And this is where things came crashing down for them, because FIFA denied the exception to the rule. They said that the parental relocation exception does not apply to them because their move was influenced by football. And to be honest, it's really tough to fight against that argument, that this move was influenced by football in some way. Even if Turrid had gotten a job in Porto, it was influenced by the academy that Oscar could go to in Portugal. And especially when you're a family with a star as big as Oscar Bobb, with the potential that he has, of course, the nearby academy is going to play a factor in where you move. So Oscar couldn't play football, but that wasn't going to stop Turrid from fighting for him. She sent in appeals saying, I moved to Portugal before Oscar. It had nothing to do with football. In fact, I actually did some research and I found this. It's on YouTube by Turrid Gunn, his mother, 9 subscribers. I just found this. It has 500 views. And on YouTube, you can see some of the acting jobs she got before she made the move to Portugal. In fact, this was posted in January of 2015, the exact same year that Oscar and Turrid were moving to Portugal. So I would be willing to bet that this video and some of the views you see here have been seen by some high-ranking FIFA judiciary officials. I'll be her 10th subscriber and drop a comment saying, Oscar made it. You did a great job. And if you want to be a subscriber to me before I hit 10,000 subscribers, well, you better be quick because we're coming up on that mark now, and you want to be able to tell your grandchildren that you subscribe to Nitro Football before 10,000 subscribers. However, this fight was still not over for Turrid and Oscar, because Turrid took this all the way to the Court of Arbitration for FIFA, where again they ruled against the family, even after they tried signing for another club in Portugal called Gonçalves. Basically, Oscar Bobb was left without a club for the better part of 2 years, where he then had to return to Oslo and sign for another club, Vålerenga. A lot of players would see their growth stunt during this time and their potential drop, but it didn't seem to affect Oscar Bobb. When he returned to Oslo, he continued playing at a very high level for his age, and once he turned 16, he qualified for the EU exception, and he made a transfer to the team we know him at today, Manchester City. Oscar Bobb quickly moved up the teams in Manchester's academy. He went from the U19 to the U21 to the U23 team at Manchester City, playing in the Premier League 2, where he scored 13 goals and had 27 assists in just over 50 matches. And that's when Pep Guardiola took note and called him up to the first team. Pep Guardiola was using him as a utility sub for his forwards because Oscar Bobb was willing to play anywhere. He prefers the right side over on right wing, but he could even play striker, left wing, attacking midfielder, right mid. If Pep Guardiola needed to bring somebody on late in the game, he would just throw him in somewhere. And he actually ended up getting a goal and an assist in just over 200 minutes of game time, which isn't terrible for your first campaign, but it's really the summer tour for Manchester City where he has been shining very bright. He had spectacular performances against Chelsea and AC Milan during their summer tour in the USA, and then he got a start in the Community Shield game against Manchester United, where he had the assist to Bernardo Silva that saved Manchester City, where they ended up winning the trophy in penalties. Without Oscar Bobb, their rivals, Manchester United, are lifting that trophy. So this brings us back to what Pep Guardiola praises about Oscar Bobb, saying this is something he has that not every player is able to achieve and could make or break their career.
Oscar got something that is the most important thing. He's the relying on his mates. It's more important than relying on the manager. When the mates can say, okay, this player can play with us, that is the best triumph, the best success.
Who cares if Pep Guardiola accepts him into the team if the players don't? But veterans like De Bruyne and stars like Haaland and Rodri seem to mesh very well with Oscar Bobb and encourage him being around that environment. And I think that when you're surrounded by absolute stars like that, the only way you can go is up. His performances in these glorified friendlies might not mean everything, but with the departure of Julian Alvarez, there's a spot open for somebody to fill. And even though they've signed Savinho and Doku does get a lot of minutes over on the left side, there's definitely an opportunity for Oscar Bobb to work his way into more minutes leading in to this Premier League campaign. The continuation of that Pep quote really underscores the seamless integration that Oscar Bobb has had into what is probably the best club team in the world right now, and that means that Oscar Bobb could really be the next biggest name in football. That's it for today, guys. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to Nitro Football. I'll see you in the next one.